I'm going to read you the first two poems in his first book. I first heard about Jim Harrison in 1968 when I went to Michigan State University to teach creative writing there, and kept hearing rumors about somebody who I just missed. And it's very unusual when you, especially in those days when you were teaching creative writing, to have somebody celebrated already almost before they even got their degree. Not only celebrated, but he had also by then already turned down. He'd been teaching briefly, and turned in his teaching robes, whatever they might have been, in short order with no regrets whatsoever, which made everybody in the English department tremble with fear. His first poem, very short, first poem, his first book, Plain Song. And I'm reading you this, and then I'll read you just half of the second poem. And I'm doing that because I want to have you recognize that from the very beginning of his writing, especially of his published writing career, he knew who he was and he knew what he was about. And the extent of variety, sense of form, sense of himself, and so on, very, very, very unusual in any writer, and especially, I think, in a young poet. The first poem is just simply called Poem. It's only about 12 lines long. Form is the woods, the beast, a bobcat padding through red sumac, the pheasant in brake or goldenrod that he stalks, both rise to the flush, the brief low flutter and catch in air, and trees, rich green, the moving of boughs and the separate leaf, yield to conclusions they do not care about or watch. The dead, frayed bird, the beautiful plumage, the spoor of feathers, and slight pink bones. It's like, well, there's something special about that poem that you cannot, I think, immediately put your finger on. You've read a million poems about dead birds and about the woods and so on, but the tone in this one is moving very quickly toward the unique. When you get the jump to the next poem, which is called Sketch for a Job Application Blank, you realize you're in for a ride in that first book. I wish I could talk like Jim, because it adds something to it. It's not required. But exactly. My left eye is blind and jogs like a milky sparrow in the socket. My nose is large and never flares in anger. The front teeth bucked, but not in lechery. I sucked my thumb until the age of 12. Oh, my youth was happy and I was never lonely, though my friends called me Pig Eye and the teachers thought me loony. When I bruised, my psyche kept intact. I fell from horses and once a cow, but never pigs. A neighbor lost a hand to a sow. But I had some fears. The salesman of eyes, his case was full of fishy baubles against black velvet, jeweled gore, the great cocked hoof of the Belgian mare, a nest of milk snakes by the water trough, electric fences, my uncle's hounds, the arm of an old oil well, the chop and whir of a combine in the sun. And it goes on like that, making fun of himself in some places, and even when he seems to be making it and does make a joke about himself. I fell from horses and once a cow, but never pigs. He takes it that one step further. A neighbor lost a hand to a sow. In other words, he knows about animal husbandry. He's not just writing about it when he makes that joke. And a lot of the things that seem to be jokes in his poems turn out to have something, an extra layer or two, which end up making you kind of review your sense of the natural world, which is what he's almost always writing about, whether it's human beings, the natural instincts that we all have. He manages to go places that one of our presidential potents go, but when he goes through it with a sense of humor and a sense of humor. I mean, as in the humors, the many humors that we're all made up with. That gives him something much better than Teflon. It gives him a kind of a wisdom, odd wisdom, blue-collar wisdom, redneck wisdom, grounded wisdom, you know, that we don't find in very many of our poets. I'm going to read just part of the Jimmy Buffett. It's not an obituary, really. It's him talking about the relationship that they have had. They're seem like an unlikely couple in some ways, connected by alcohol a bit. But here's what he has to say. And this was published very shortly, by the way, after Jim died. I knew a lot about Jim Harrison before we ever met. He was many things to many different people. But to put it in Michigan terminology, the chassis on which the sum of all his parts rode was the undeniable fact he was a force of nature. No, he could not shift tectonic plates or cause tidal waves, but he came pretty damn close. We met at the end of the road, like so many other nomads who came looking for beginnings or endings in Key West in 1972. I was a reject from Nashville, and he was a published poet from Michigan, which put us just about at equal points on the road to success. Tom McGuane, my landlord in those days, not my brother-in-law, introduced us. He and Harrison had been best friends since college. Tom knew with his gin-clear perception of the world that we would get along. Jim did not live in Key West back then, but he visited on a regular basis, which of course was in the spring when the tarpons were running. Finding, hooking, fighting, and releasing a 100-pound fish requires a certain skill set and a lot of time on the water. You couldn't go to the gym to learn how. And to the best of my recollection, nobody I knew in Key West in those days ever came close to a gym, least of all Harrison. We went to the flats not to slay fish, but to play with them in their own backyard. When I got the word from Guy de la Vendôme this morning that Jim died at his desk while he was writing, I was, of course, sad he was gone, but glad he went that way. As Tom put it in a piece he did for the New Yorker, he was active and creative till the end, but it was time to go. No one was less suited for assisted living. At the very end of this piece, I'm just going to read the very tail end now, talking about the water and listening to it and so on. And he said, barely audible at first, but as the waves got higher and the current stronger, I had turned my humming up to 11. I checked my bearings against the beach reference point. He's swimming. And I figured I had a good couple hundred yards to weather. I stopped swimming and just floated back downstream with the current and wind behind me now, smiling and crying and singing the chorus to one of Jim's and my favorite songs that I had chimed in on 2 nights previous in Havana with 500,000 Cuban kids when the Rolling Stones let the genie out of the Cuban bottle. The words seemed to fit the moment, both for the opening of Cuba and the passing of Jim Harrison. And these are the lines from the lyric. No, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you might just find you get what you need. Jim got what he needed, and he gave us a whole lot more. I'm going to read you one of the early commentators on, or really a reviewer, on Jim's work, noticed a resemblance to the poet Theodore Roethke. And he had a very interesting thing to say about that. Roethke happened to be one of my favorite poets, and I studied with him for one day before he kicked me out of class. Unfortunately, the last class he ever taught, he died before I could take it again or get kicked out again. Long story, I'm not going to tell it to you. Jim Harrison grew up, this is by the way from Poetry Magazine. Jim Harrison grew up in northern Minnesota and shares with that other Michigan poet, Theodore Redke, not only the longing to be part of the instinctual world, but also the remarkable knowledge of plant and animal life that comes only with long familiarity and close observation. This raises an incidental question. This is why I'm telling you this particular quote. It's a good question. How many more poets of this kind will we see in the United States? It's a melancholy thought that Mr. Harrison may be one of the last of the species. I'm going to read you a list that I think you recognize, some of you more than others. Braided Creek, a conversation in poetry with Ted Kooser. The Shape of the Journey, After Q, The Theory and Practice of Rivers and New Poems, True North, The Road Home, Returning to Earth, Dalva, Sundog, Letters to Yesenin, Outliers and Ghazals, Warlock, Farmer, A Good Day to Die, The Summer He Didn't Die, The Beast God Forgot to Invent, The Woman Lit by Fireflies, Farmer, I read, Wolf, A False Memoir, Legends of the Fall, Off to the Side, A Memoir, Locations, Plain Song, The Boy Who Ran into the Woods, Just Before Dark, The Raw and the Cooked Adventures of a Roving Roman, Off to the Side, A Good Day to Die. These are some of the titles. They give a hint, a lot of hints about what he lived from, lived through, lived for, and shared with us, I think. Combination of elements and attitudes and tones that I think our recent winner of the Nobel Prize, this is one of the few, this is actually the only American poet I can think of that I'm almost certain Bob Dylan would really love to read. He didn't have time for a lot of things, kinds of things, Bob, and neither did Jim. But I think just about every kind of note and combination of note and chords of emotions that Harrison comes up with, hit or miss, he misses sometimes, but it's all part of the risk that's needed to get to the heart of things, which he almost always, well, he did really always get to the heart of it in some fashion or another. I opened this book, Shape of the Journey, while Pam was reading what she was reading. And let's see if I can find that poem again that I opened it to. Oops. I'm sorry. When I brought this book up here, I skipped it. Okay, so I'll just pick another poem. Actually, I'll read you one of the poems that Pam read you because you couldn't hear it. You heard the beginning. This is from Return to Earth. I no longer believe in the idea of magic, Christs, the shelf, the self, metal Buddhas, Bibles. A horse is the only space his hoarseness requires. That line, a horse is only the space his hoarseness requires. Who else could have written that line? It's beautiful, it's funny, it's hilarious, it's absolutely true, and it's unique. I've never seen that kind of line written before. If I pissed in the woods, he doesn't take himself so seriously. He's not preaching. If I pissed in the woods, would a tree see my ear fall off, and would the ear return to the body on the morning of the third day? Do the bow trees even remember the Buddhas who slept beneath them? I admit that yesterday I built an exploratory altar. Who can squash his delight in incomprehension? So on a piece of old newspaper I put an earthworm on a maple leaf, the remains of a bluebird after the cat was finished, head and feet, some dog hair, shaving